100 hertz LFO on a flanger. That sounds kind of unhinged. Let's see what it sounds like. There are all these constraints that Ableton or Serum put on you, like, no, you can't have an LFO that's faster than 20 hertz. And it's just completely arbitrary, and I don't want to be limited like that. So if I build my own flanger, I can do really unhinged stuff to it like this. So that's it. Alright, one of the questions that I get asked the most is, Sin, why do you always seem to choose the most complicated way of doing the simplest thing in audio? Like, why do you use a modular plugin instead of a wavetable synth? To answer that, I'd like to point out a few videos that exist. For example, I just saw AU5's video on how to do phase distortion in Serum effects, which was awesome. Or an even better example is my own video on how to do an envelope follower in Serum effects, or any number of my other exclusive videos. See, we're only able to do this once we understand exactly how these effects work on the back end. So if you want to really level up your sound design game, this is, in my opinion, the best first step. So this plugin, it's called Audulus4. I'm going to tell you just up front, this plugin is not available on Windows. So if you're not a Mac user, you can still follow along what I'm doing. The point is actually not necessarily like, here's how to use this plugin. The point is, here's how like these effects work on the back end. If you want, you can follow along in any other modular plugin, basically. Max for Live, Plug Data. There's another one called Highs that I haven't tried yet, but it looks pretty good. So that's what we're doing. So, feedback loops. What I'm going to show you today is how delay, flanger, comb filter, and a low pass filter, all of those are essentially the same feedback-based effect, just with different packaging and with like a few tiny changes. And we're going to do this all in one video. So, if you missed my last video, what I covered was you can basically go to Google Images and search for whatever audio effect, like audio delay, and then type in block diagram, and you can get these diagrams that look like this. They seem kind of confusing until you realize they're really just three things. These arrows in and out, that's the start and the end, which is just the input and the output. The circles are the sums, and that's just where two or more signals get added together. A square is a delay, and the triangle is just a gain multiplier. So this one is just multiplying the gain by a percentage between 0 and 100. Very simple. This diagram is just for a very basic delay. The reason that they're called feedback loops is because you can see that the input signal goes through here. It gets delayed by a certain amount of time, and then it goes out to the output, but it also gets looped back, has its gain reduced, and then gets sent back into this sum. So there's an active loop going on. This is the fundamental building block that so many effects are built on. Once you know this, you can do all sorts of crazy things. So like I did in the last video, I'm just going to really quickly just recap how this plugin works so that you have the full picture and can follow along properly. First, the plugin requires you to set up your inputs and outputs. To connect the two, we're going to need two sum nodes, one for the in, one for the out. Just like in the block diagram, we're going to add them together on the input and the output. We connect them, and now we have audio coming through. That's the loop we're going to be working with today. So I'm going to give us a bit of room to work in. Now what we can do is open up this block diagram and basically just copy it block for block in order to make our own delay. So what were our ingredients again? There were two sums, one for the feedback and one for the dry-wet mix. There was one gain multiplier. So those will be sum and product, respectively. For the delay, we need to go into DSP and find the delay line node. If you're at all confused about what this delay line means exactly or how it's different from just a delay effect that you would get inside your DAW, you can basically imagine this as a delay effect, but with the dry wet at 100%, the feedback set to 0, and all the filtering and stereo processing turned off. The only thing that this does is it takes the input, waits a certain amount of time, and then sends it out the output. The other thing we're missing is, of course, parameters. Inside the module tab, there are these, just called knob. We can grab 3, open the editor panel, and then rename them to time, feedback, and dry wet. So now we've got basically all of our ingredients on the table. Now we can start hooking them up one by one. So if we take one more look at our cheat sheet here, the input goes into the sum, then the delay. So why don't we set that up first? Input, sum, delay. Then it goes into the multiplier and back into the sum, into the product, back into the sum. And then the output of the delay was also going into the second sum. So hook that up like so, and hook up the dry. This is where we should also hook up our knobs. The time knob should be connected to time. That makes sense. Feedback goes into the open slot on the product node, which is our gain multiplier. Now we've run into a bit of a problem because there's nowhere for dry wet to go. For this problem, we need to go back into the math tab and find this expression node. When you drag it in and click on it, you're going to see a whole bunch of these mathematical expressions. This might look intimidating at first, but I promise it's not. But we don't have to worry about any of these except for one. Masha says hi. And that is this one here called mix. Mix is very useful because when you drag it in, you're going to see these 3 letters. A and B represent 2 signals you're crossfading between, and X is whatever modulator you're using to fade between them. So just for clarity, I find it's usually a pretty good idea to rename the variables to what they actually are. Otherwise, you come back to a project after leaving it and you forget. So I'm going to rename X to knob, A to dry, and B to wet. And now it's much more clear what we're doing here. So hook the dry wet knob up to the knob, the delay to the wet, and the dry input to the dry. And now we can just connect that to our output. This is going to be our starting point. Now that we have this set up, we have a working delay and we can basically do whatever we want with it. So that's our delay. Now we're going to take it one step further, and I'm going to show you how to turn this into a flanger. I'm going to show you the flanger block diagram. It is a step up, so I hope you're ready. This is it. And if you look at it, it's pretty clearly almost the exact same topology. There's the input, goes into the delay, gets fed back, input also goes into the output, and that's literally the same as the delay one we just looked at. So what makes the delay a flanger versus an actual delay? Well, the first thing is this one. See, I've said this in previous videos, delay hood is a spectrum. If you take a simple delay, like we just looked at, and we shorten the delay time so that it's very, very short, like no longer than 25 milliseconds, then it's no longer a delay. It's either a comb filter or a flanger. You add an LFO onto the delay time, that is what makes it a flanger. We can do this very easily inside Audulus as well. So how do we create an LFO in the software? Well, inside the synth tab, we have this node here called OSC. So now that we've introduced an LFO, one of the things we need to do is connect it to the actual delay time, and we'll get to that. But first, we also need parameters for the frequency and the amplitude of the LFO. I've dragged in 2 more knobs. This one I'm going to call LFO rate, and this one, LFO amount. We can connect the rate knob to the hertz input, and the amount I'll save for later. With just one expression node, we can simply type in the number 1, connect that to amp, and we have liftoff. Our next job is to connect it to the delay line somehow. Whenever we're connecting a modulation source to any input, we need to think about what number is coming out of the modulator and what number does the receiving node want to receive. For the delay line, time only wants values in seconds. If we take a look at our LFO and connect it to the value, we can see it's outputting values between -1 and 1. This is because this oscillator assumes you want audio. The ideal range for audio is always between -1 and 1. And that's great, but what we want is to turn these values into a value in seconds. This time input, it accepts values in seconds. So 0.31 is just fine for a delay time that's measured in seconds. But if we were to connect this LFO somehow into the time input, it wouldn't work out so well, because half of the LFO's output is in the negatives. You can't have a negative delay time. It just wouldn't work. So we have to find a way to make this wave entirely positive. You might want to remember this. Using an expression node to turn a bipolar signal, that's a signal that goes negative and positive, into a unipolar signal, which is a signal that only goes between 0 and 1. The formula for that is, I've written in LFO in here. As I start doing math or whatever to it, you'll see exactly how it changes shape. So what we want is LFO divided by 2. Now it's at half amplitude plus 0.5. And if we connect this to the value readout as well, we can see that it no longer goes negative. Now that our LFO is unipolar, we only have just 2 more things to do. The first is to find a way to connect it to the delay time in a way that allows both the LFO and the time knob to influence it. To do this is very simple. We just drop in one sum node, connect the knob, and connect that to the time input. And we're almost ready to connect the LFO. We just have to also scale it by this LFO amount knob. Otherwise, we don't have control over it. With that, we can just take one product, connect the LFO, connect the knob, and then connect that here. Now, what we have here is a delay with an LFO on the delay time. And that is great. That's a great accomplishment, but it's not a flanger yet. And the reason is that other difference that I mentioned, that is in the delay time. Before all of our delay time modulation data enters the delay line itself, we need to bring it into flanger range. Using one expression node, all we have to do is multiply it by the maximum delay time of a flanger. Let's call this one time times 0.025. This simple multiplication, what it's going to do is it's going to take all of this that we just made and rescale it way down so that the delay time is short enough to be a flanger. This is literally the difference between a flanger and a delay. Now let's see how this sounds. That is pretty good. If we want, we can do the same thing to this LFO rate knob. These knobs can only contain values between 0 and 1. So what if we used another expression node to bring the LFO rate to something absurd? Rate times 100? 100 hertz LFO on a flanger? That sounds kind of unhinged. Let's see what it sounds like. So hopefully now you can see why I love these plugins, because there are all these constraints that Ableton or Serum or whatever put on you. Like, no, you can't have an LFO that's faster than 20 hertz. And it's just completely arbitrary. And I don't want to be limited like that. So if I build my own flanger, I can do really unhinged stuff to it like this. So that's it. That's our flanger. Now I'm going to tell you about comb filters. A comb filter and a flanger are very, very similar. If we pull up the block diagram, you're going to see it looks remarkably similar to the last two, and it might actually be difficult to spot the differences at first. The most obvious one is right here on the feedback. You can see instead of going from 0 to 100, it now goes from negative 100 to plus 100. So we'll have to account for that. Also, the one that's much less obvious is the output. Before, the input went into the delay, then the delay went into a sum in the output. This one has no output sum, and that would mean that there's no like dry-wet control, but every comb filter I've ever used has had a dry-wet control. So for ours, we should just leave the mix where it is. But the wet signal is actually being tapped out of the feedback sum instead of the delay. And the difference here is very subtle, but it is important, and we'll account for that as well. The last difference is this delay, it's still a delay, but instead of a delay parameter, instead it says frequency. So we need a knob whose output is a measurement of frequency, but it needs to be controlling the delay time. If you're not sure how to do that, don't worry, we'll get to it in just a second. So the comb filter actually doesn't have an LFO. We can have one if we want it, but for now, I'm just going to set it aside like so. I'm also going to set aside this conversion. So hook the knob up to time and like so. Remember, the wet signal is tapping out of the sum instead of the delay. So we hook that up. I'm going to bring the dry wet all the way up. That is how a comb filter normally works. Now, so in order to change this delay time knob into a frequency knob, I'm going to rename it, but obviously a little bit more is needed. I touched on this a little bit during the flanger part. This has to do with a little bit of math that we have to do. It's not complicated, I promise. Whenever math is used in a plugin like this, the three most common use cases for any math inside here is either adding two signals together with sum, multiplying two signals using product, or converting a signal from one domain to another. For this comb filter, what we have to do is convert this knob value, which has a range of 0 to 1, then convert it into a frequency value, then convert that frequency value into a time value in order to go into the delay line. Every domain conversion has its own formula, and as you start to learn these, you should probably like type them out or write them down somewhere because they come in really handy. And we have to make two domain conversions, so that'll be two expression nodes. The first conversion we're doing is between a knob to frequency. Whenever you're converting a knob into any value, the formula is always the same. It looks like this. Knob times, in brackets, maximum minus minimum, and then outside of the brackets, plus minimum. It's that simple. So a frequency knob typically has values between 20 and 20,000 hertz. So we could plug those numbers into these two inputs, but I really don't like clutter. So instead, I'm just going to replace these minimum and maximum values with the actual numbers. So 20,000 minus 20 plus 20. See, this is so much cleaner. So we plug the knob into here, and now we see that the 0 to 1 value has been converted. So now it goes between 20 and 20,000. Easy peasy. Now we have to use this second expression knob in order to turn this frequency value into a value in seconds. And this one is actually much easier. You just go 1 divided by frequency. And now if we hook that up, we can see that the new frequency value goes between 50 milliseconds all the way up to 0.1 milliseconds. Now, before we start playing around with this, we need to do something about the feedback knob. And once again, its value goes between 0 and 1. Remember, from the block diagram, what we need now is a feedback knob that goes between -1 and +1. For this, we just need to do another domain conversion. The formula for this is knob times 2, -1. Now, if we hook that up, you can see that in the middle, the value is 0. At the max, it's at 1, and at the minimum, it's at -1. Now, the newly converted feedback knob can be hooked up to the product node. This should work, so let's see how it sounds. And negative. Easy peasy. That's our comb filter. Okay. This is the block diagram for a low pass filter. You can see this one does look a little different, but the rules haven't changed at all. The shapes all mean the same things that they did before. They just have slightly different symbols on them. And if this is a bit confusing, I've made this version, which should be a little bit less confusing. Once again, the red triangles are just gain multipliers, the green circle is the sum, and the blue square is a delay. Now, it says z to the power of -1 on it. If you ever see this in any block diagram, this just means that it's a one sample delay. Now, a one sample delay is like the key ingredient to almost every kind of filter that we work with in music production. And I'll show you how to do this in the plugin in just a second. You'll see it also has 2 gain multipliers, and it has this A here, and that just means this is a parameter. And the parameter is just cut off. The reason this one says 1 minus A is because they are unipolar opposites. So if this is a cutoff knob, when it's all the way up, or at 1, that means the cutoff is all the way at the top. And if it's all the way at the top, the dry signal is at full volume. As you bring the cutoff knob down, the dry signal gets quieter and the feedback signal gets louder. This relationship here is what allows for like the smooth blending between the dry signal and the low pass signal. So I'll show you how to build it. This time it's getting a little messy, so why don't we start from scratch? Right, for this feedback loop, we want one multiplier, the sum goes to the wet. Then for the one sample delay, we want this one here called unit delay. Now that we've dragged it in, we can connect the output of the sum to the unit delay, to another multiplier, and then back into the sum. The nice thing about the unit delay is that we don't have to worry about delay time or anything like that, because the delay time stays the same no matter what. Now we only have to worry about one knob, and that is cutoff. I'm going to name it. Cutoff can be connected directly to that first multiplier, but because there was that extra bit of math, we also need to convert it before it goes into the second one. So the formula on it said 1 minus A. So why don't we just type that in and keep things simple? Now we can connect the knob to A and then connect that to the product. And that's it. Here's what it sounds like. It is a very gentle low pass. This is a 1-pole low pass, also known as 6 decibel, which is a very, very gentle slope. We also don't get a control for resonance, unfortunately. And the reason for that is we only have one feedback path. This is sort of beyond the scope of this video, but if we had like a second unit delay after this one, and then a second multiplier, and then added another channel to this sum, so that there were 3 instead of just like 1 dry and 1 wet, then we could add resonance, but you can't do that with only 1 pole, sadly. So there it is. There's your intro to feedback loops. I hope that you enjoyed this or found this informative. I've sort of been spending the past year learning the back end of all these effects so that I could like start working on my more complex ideas. And it has helped me a lot in sort of learning more advanced sound design. And I hope this does the same for you. If you would like to download any of these presets for this Audulus4 plugin, the link will be in the description. And I'll also have 1 or 2 more for maybe something else. I don't know. The link will take you to my Patreon, which I'm going to go ahead and recommend. I am uploading like some exclusive tutorial videos up there. My last one was a few hacks for random, like really cool stuff that you can do in Serum. And I'm putting new content up there every month or so. So if you liked this one, you should definitely check out my Patreon. That's all I got for now. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.